So from that vantage point of planetary peace, what do you remember?
Remember? Well, I remember a lot of things, but what I want to talk about is that. So, universal, unconditional, global compassion is the solution to any difficulty facing humanity. And so if we apply universal, unconditional, global compassion to any situation, we can resolve it. And if we don't approach it from that perspective, we can only put a patch on things. We can solve one problem and create another problem as we solve one problem. The only way to really resolve all the issues that's facing humanity right now for our survival on Earth is universal, unconditional, global compassion. And so what that means is there can't be judgment. We have to go beyond judgment. We have to go beyond dualistic perspectives. And so, for example, now, since the 1960s, 1970, we had an anti-war movement. You know, the student strike to end the war in Vietnam, and we stopped the draft, and then we went back to school, or they went back to school. I didn't, but so this is the first time we have a real, actual peace movement in this country and around the world. Since then, you know, all the anti-war movements in between have been just kind of like, you know, a little bit, not really effective, not really. But what's going on right now with this peace anti-war movement is it's characterized, the way it presents itself is as pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel /Zionism. And so in order for it to be compassion, so you don't get to have like okay, so we have compassion we're presenting the peace movement as if we have compassion for the Palestinians, but we're demonizing the Israelis. Right? And so it's not really compassion, it's judgment. And so the solution to this problem it's a very simple solution, and it's been right in front of our noses for the last 76 years, but nobody's been able to see it. No one seems to have ever talked about it. Maybe somebody has somewhere, but I couldn't find it. You know? And the reason why this very simple apparent thing is invisible is because everybody's picking sides. Everybody's busy deciding who's right and who's wrong. And as long as you're deciding who's right and who's wrong, it's judgment, and you're not able to resolve anything. And so before I say like about that particular conflict, because it brings up a lot of things for people, let me just make it a lot more simple. Let's say we have a shooter standing in front of a classroom of kindergarten children. All right, and you know he's holding these children at gunpoint and he's getting ready to shoot them. All right, so how you perceive, most people would perceive that situation as, oh, these children, they're the victims or the potential victims, and this person with the gun is the perpetrator, right? And so as long as we see it that way, we have to be very careful, because perception plays an active role in creating and manifesting that which is being perceived. And so when you perceive the shooter as the aggressor, right? And then of course you're demonizing him because he's the bad guy, right? And without realizing, how you perceive the situation can have an effect to increase or decrease the likelihood of positive or negative outcome. So if you go to that person and say, who the hell you think you are now, then that's what he's expecting. In fact, the reason why he's there in the first place is because he's in pain and he's suffering, right? He doesn't expect to survive this event. So it's a form of suicide, but he's in so much pain that that's just not enough for him to just kill himself. He's got to take other innocent children with him, right? And the reason why is because he's in pain, because he hasn't been treated with compassion. And so if you look at that person as the victim as well, he's also the victim.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
And so what you can do is you can try to offer compassion to that person. And that process can minimize or decrease the likelihood of the negative action that he's about to take. So instead of saying, who do you think you are? I'm gonna, right? You could just say, hey brother, it looks like you're about to do something that it's gonna take you many lifetimes to work through this. You're gonna create a lot of suffering, not just for these people, but for yourself. And would you like somebody, is there anything I can do to help you? Would you like somebody to talk to? Or anything, any way you could try and relate to them. Oh, cool shoes you got. Where'd you get those shoes? Anything, right? And so that's not necessarily going to make it so that the negative possibility doesn't happen, but it changes the odds, right? And it can diffuse the situation. Whereas seeing him as the perpetrator can catalyze the situation. And so you can catalyze a situation without realizing it just by the way you perceive it. And so now we apply that. Israel is the shooter standing in front of the kindergarten children. And so instead of judging them, we don't have to agree with them. We don't have to condone their actions. But if we can try to understand where they're coming from, it's actually something that can be understood. And so the reason why Israel is acting the way that it is right now is because they're scared and they feel that they have no alternative to what they're doing. The Gaza experiment was an attempt at the two-state solution. There was a point at which there was a colonial settler problem, a colonial settler program going on in Gaza the same way as it's still going on in the West Bank. And I can't tell you the exact year, but Israel, in an attempt to resolve the issue, they pulled out of Gaza. They said, okay, we're turning Gaza over to the Palestinians. You can have an election, you can elect who you want, have a democracy. And the Israeli government ordered all the settlers that were in Gaza to leave. And some of them didn't want to leave, and the military went in and forced their own people out. And the Palestinians had an election, and they picked Hamas. It wasn't the type of like a two-party system, so Hamas didn't get like a majority. I think it was something like 30%, right? But it was the largest percentage. So they're the ones that came into power. And so, there's a whole lot of characterizations about what Hamas is, but we don't really know. And I'm sure that there's a spectrum
What's up, boss man?
in Hamas. Maybe there's the most extremist element,
So I'm thinking,
is people that just want to destroy Israel. And then there's also an extremist element in Israel that wants to destroy the Palestinians. And so this whole, this whole thing,
let me double check.
So, when you hear, okay, here's something. You hear about Zionism, right? And Zionism there's a lot of, talked about in a lot of negative ways, right? And all these negative things that are said about Zionism, to me, it's not Zionism, it's radical fundamentalism. And radical fundamentalism is the idea that the ends justify the means. So when the United States was conquering this when the European settlers were conquering this continent, they had a saying, the only good Indian is a dead Indian. And this expression was used to justify genocide. Killing women and children, non-combatants. That's genocide. And so that's radical fundamentalism. So Zionism is simply an idea that God promised a certain place to certain people. Just because somebody believed that God promised a certain place to certain people doesn't mean that those people believe that they have a right to victimize the other people who are there. Right? That victimization, that's radical fundamentalism. It shouldn't be called Zionism. And so you have radical fundamentalism on both sides. So, sure, there's an element supposedly in Hamas that just wants to destroy Israel. And Israel feels they have to destroy Hamas, that the two-state solution, Netanyahu's entire platform is to make sure that there can never be a two-state solution because he and that government views the two-state solution as a death sentence for Israel. And the two-state solution that's been proposed, this 1967 borders that were proposed, if you look at the map, the size of their area that was proposed for the Palestinians is 20% of the size of the hole between the river and the sea. And there's roughly 7 million Arabic people in Israel and 7 million Jewish people. So the proposed two-state solution was to give 20% area to the same number of people as the other people that had 80% area. So it's complete inequality. But the present position of the Israeli government is, and a lot of probably the majority, maybe even 80% of the Israeli people don't want a two-state solution. And mostly the Palestinians don't want a two-state solution. It's the rest of the world that's all about the two-state solution. People there aren't really interested in it. And so, then, I'm skipping around a little bit, but the peace movement is, the platform is demanding that the United States stop funding Israel. And, the world peace movement is demanding the ceasefire. Right? Well, the thing about, and you'll never hear this, and certainly you won't hear it in mainstream media, and you probably won't even hear it in alternative media, is that the United States cannot stop funding Israel no matter what Israel does, because the second that the other enemies of Israel know that the United States is no longer funding Israel, they'll move in for the kill. And so by continuing to fund Israel, as long as Israel continues to do what it's doing, will eventually lead to a global conflict. And if we stop funding Israel, it'll lead to a global conflict quicker. Because we'll get drawn in it. And Israel has at least 80 nuclear warheads. And so desperate people, desperate countries do desperate things. So it's not like there's a government in Israel that's going to reason out, well, if we're being destroyed, and we use a nuke, we'll be destroyed anyway. So maybe we shouldn't use a nuke and just let ourselves be destroyed. That's not going to happen. It's going to be more like, we're not going to be destroyed. If we're going down, everyone's going down with us. Israel will use whatever they have to defend themselves, even when they're faced with, an unresolvable situation where they're under so much attack.
You guys should clear all this out there.
That, there's millions of people. There's not just Palestinian lives, but Israeli lives as well.
Oh, really?
So
Where have you been?
the solution is to. Okay, so here's the thing. You hear about self-determination for Palestinians, right? And then we had Vice President Kamala Harris came on, and she said, at one point, she said, there will be no forced expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza, right? Well, actually, those people are prisoners. When the United Nations in 1949, recognized the state of Israel, and then the new government of Israel proceeded to try to expel the Palestinians, and they were driving them. They were driving them into Egypt. They were driving them into Syria. They were driving them into Jordan, and then those countries closed and locked their doors and said no more. But I think it's like 700,000 Palestinians exited the country, and the rest have been trapped. So once they pushed up against the Egypt border, and then they made the boundary where they can't come back into Greater Israel from Gaza. So they're a captive population. They're basically prisoners. So saying there will be no forced expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza is the same as saying there will be no forced expulsion of prisoners from prison, right? And then another rhetoric that you hear is, oh, the Palestinians don't want to leave. Well, it's an absurd thing to say, because the only way to find out if they want to leave is to go and ask them and to offer them the opportunity to leave. And so if someone has a gun held to their head and somebody says, give me your wallet or I'm going to blow your head off, sure, there's people that are going to try to disarm that person, and maybe they disarm the person with the gun, or maybe they die. There's people that won't give up their wallet, but there's people that will give up their wallet because they value their life more than their wallet. And in the case of Palestine, the wallet right now is a pile of rubble. So sure, there are people that will stay on principle for two reasons. One is they believe that that's their homeland and they shouldn't have to leave. And another reason is that they hate and want to destroy Israel, and that that's more important to them than their own lives. So just as the Jewish world used to consist of a whole spectrum of ideas from one extreme to the other, with everything in between. But with October 7th, kind of the middle dropped out, right? And you just have two extremes, right? There's a Jewish group that's organizing, one of the main organizers of the peace movement, the way it is now, called Jewish Voice for Peace, JVP, and they're presenting as pro-Palestinian and anti-Zionism.
Yeah.
And their views are as extreme as the views of the right-wing government of Israel that's doing the bombing right now. So we have all the countries of the world, the United Nations, the Friends of Israel, the enemies of Israel, and everybody's making resolutions and demands and posturing, right? And it just seems really strange to me that there's nobody, virtually nobody, reaching out and saying, well, wait a minute, there's people being bombed and starved to death. Maybe we need to go rescue them. Maybe we need to grant asylum to Palestinians. Maybe we need to give them refuge, sanctuary, right? And the rhetoric against that is, oh my God, no, we can't do that, because that would be helping Israel to accomplish the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Well, if it helps Israel to accomplish their goal without killing people, like right now, we've had 6 months of bombing there, and there's 30,000 plus people dead. That's 5,000 a month. Well, what if we had a worldwide global effort, right, to help Palestinians that want to leave?
We've got to get work done before we get started.
Yeah.
We find out who wants to leave, and we get 1,000 a day. We facilitate 1,000 a day of willing people that want to leave.
Do you want to just come with me one sec?
Yeah.
Just to wrap this up, just come with
Yeah.
me. Just to. They need to come this way.
Do you have all your things? Just
Yeah.
a few push it up.
I think it's just this. Let's just finish it up here because it's a beautiful transmission with the dome in the background.
So we could have 1,000 people a day leaving there, with Israel wouldn't have to kill anybody. And their goal is the ethnic cleansing, forced expulsion through ethnic cleansing. They don't want to have to kill those people, but they're willing to, because they believe that that's what they have to do. So yes, Israel will continue what they're doing, but only because the message to the world, driving them south to the Rafah, you know, the message is, we want these people out. We'll kill them if we have to, but we want them to leave, right? And really the same thing happened in World War II, because the original agenda of the Nazis was the ethnic cleansing of the Jews, forced expulsion, ethnic cleansing, and the final solution didn't come into play until the Wannsee Conference, which is when the decision was made. But before that, yes, they were killing people. They were trying to get they thought that the world would open their doors and receive, you know, there were 12 million Jewish refugees, right? The United States took 997 of them, you know, and basically the world didn't cooperate. The world didn't want the Jews, didn't want Jewish refugees. No, we don't want them. And now we have the same thing, but then the world really didn't have any way to know what was going to happen to the Jews, right? But we know exactly what's happening to the Palestinians, right? And we're still only just saying, oh, well, we're taking positions, but we're not taking action. Because the action is to go to the Palestinian people, say, does anyone want to leave? We've got a place for you to go. We'll come get you. We'll bring you somewhere where you'll be safe. And my estimate is that's 1 million people. And if they leave at 1,000 a day, that's 3.5 years.
We did a story on this in front of the Taj Mahal a few weeks ago in India, and we called it the story of the peace boats. That the peace boats came in, and initially it was the children and the mothers, and then followed
and the wounded,
and
the people that need
Yeah.
immediate medical attention.
And so the peace boats came in, and every one of those people were assigned an identity and a therapist to support them with their trauma. Healers. The children had teddy bears.
Yeah.
And the boats were filled with people that could support the capacity for those individuals to reach their fullest potential, and to end what we called the unwholesome threesome, which is the never-ending dance that was happening between victim, hero, and perpetrator.
Right, so you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about, yeah. And so as long as I think we were caught in that loop, story loop that was an unwholesome threesome because nobody wins. It's a story where we all lose. And it's actually the opposite, that it's not some of us, it's all of us, or none of us.
Right. And then the whole premise of having a Jewish state was a fatally flawed thing because it's based on inequality. And the balance needs to be restored. So, it's a mistake that was made 76 years ago, and we're dealing with it today. So, and there's like 7 million Arabic people and 7 million Jewish people between the river and the sea altogether. So if you have a Palestinian diaspora that reduces the Palestinian population in that area, in that region, by 1 million or so, then Israel can have a democracy, can have a one-state solution where with equal rights, and that could be palatable to them at that point because they'll be able to maintain a political majority. Right? And look, in this country, we ended slavery, 160 years ago? And we still have economic apartheid. We still have victimization of black people in this country, but it's slowly learning how to live with each other. Right? And it could take hundreds of years. Right? But right now, if things keep going the way that they're going, we end up in a global conflict, and a desperate Israel could do a desperate thing, could use nuclear weapons.
Totally.
And that's
okay.
World War III,
So, what in a sentence coming from the future, what was the synthesis that was that golden thread, that golden decade story?
Humanity woke up and realized that they needed that compassion required action, and it required not just sitting back and saying this and that about what's going on, but doing something about it. And the thing to do is to reach out to these people who are being bombed and starved and ask them if they want to leave. And whoever wants to leave, the people in Palestine that their goal in life is not, they just want to live their lives. They would just as soon get as far away from Israel as they could. There's two groups. There's ones that would just as soon get as far away from Israel as they could, but they can't. And there's others that would leave because they don't want to die. And
Got it.
So demonizing Israel isn't getting us anywhere. It's not to say that what they're doing is justified. It's suicidal, really. Because this is the fundamental realization, the quantum shift in human consciousness is the understanding that you can't harm someone else without harming yourself. And so Israel is harming itself. They can't exterminate 2.4 million people without destroying themselves.
Isn't it? It's so mythically coherent that the unprocessed trauma of the Second World War has manifest into a rising of the collective boil, if you like, of that underbelly of the unprocessed trauma in the collective identity, and particularly of the fear frequency, that it is quite literally manifested that which we experienced. That it's the history manifesting the future as a mirror of the victim to the perpetrator.
Yes.
Back to the victim.
Yep.
And the ping pong.
That's right.
Whilst every side thinks they're the hero.
That's right. We either get past that or we self-destruct as a species on the planet.
Right. Thank you, Ut. Thank you, Ut, for your wisdom. For being an elder, for sharing this wisdom with us in this beautiful 29 minutes, 52 seconds. So thank you for such a pathway and for speaking it and taking action.
Oh,
I hope. Beautiful.
so am I going to be able to